Hello everybody and welcome back to another not applicable Formula 1 video. I hope you're well. I hope you enjoyed the French Grand Prix over the weekend. I certainly did. It was absolutely sensational. It was the perfect French Grand Prix. I couldn't have thought of a way that this race could have gone any better. Specifically at the front of the grid, we saw a real battle between both Red Bulls and both Mercedes, and it was the Red Bull boys that came out on top. Max Verstappen winning this Grand Prix, Hamilton in second, Perez in third, and Bottas down in fourth, the worst of those four. Yes, they were a minute ahead of everyone else, but those four there, and Valtteri Bottas again is the man that loses out on the podium. Talking about Max Verstappen first though, had a bit of a mixed race actually. If you look back at the start of the race, we were looking at Max Verstappen losing the lead to Hamilton very, very early. And I think if he hadn't gone on to win the race, we'd maybe be looking at this incident and thinking, wow, is this a turning point for Max Verstappen? Did he crumble under the pressure a little bit? Did he not quite get it right in the big race? But actually what he did was came back. He was like, I'm going to go through this. I've come out a little bit unfortunate after that sort of lock up into turn one, going wide into turn two. Hamilton took the lead of the race, and then Max Verstappen was just like, look, I'm going to make the best of this bad scenario. He got the undercut in, and my goodness, the undercut was exceptionally strong in this track, wasn't it? We saw so many drivers make up places, Leclerc, Ricciardo, just incredible undercut from those guys in the first pit stop. And Hamilton stayed out a little bit longer, and it was at his peril. He came out just behind Verstappen, still in front of Bottas and Perez, but even so, from that point, there was just a little bit of a turning point, wasn't there? And then Hamilton said, don't worry about it. We'll get him on the undercut in the second pit stop. And then Max Verstappen's like, I'm not going to let you have a second pit stop. Absolutely no way. I'm going to let you have a second pit stop. I'm going to pit first. And it was from that point that I was like, wow, Max Verstappen has got a hold on this race, hasn't he? He hasn't got any team radio. He doesn't really know what's happening in front of him or behind him, but he is electrically quick at this moment in time. And it was inevitable that Verstappen was going to take the lead of the race for me. I know that Hamilton was looking like he was going to keep the lead for a little while. There was that 5-second gap, and then suddenly Hamilton was able to keep that 5-second gap for a couple of laps, but it was never going to happen. Those hard tyres just looked like they were atrocious on any car you put them on this weekend, and Hamilton eventually does lose out. And he loses out in the Drivers' Championship as well. Verstappen now taking a 12-point lead, 131 points to Hamilton's 119. And you know what? It's not over by any stretch of the imagination. 12 points, a fourth place finish between them, but it's getting towards that point in the season where we're looking at where drivers are, we're looking at where they could be in a few races' time, and I think Verstappen's going to take this to the wire, you know. I think it's going to be Hamilton and Verstappen all the way to the end of the season. Also, Perez doing incredibly well to keep himself in the mix there, getting a third place finish, and another good finish for Perez in third place. Yes, he was 8 seconds behind, but went on a completely different strategy than everybody else. You got to remember, it was only Perez, Norris, and I think the two Astons that stayed out and managed to get a one-stop strategy to really work for them from the cars that I can remember. And again, it was Valtteri Bottas that loses out, wasn't it? Talking about Valtteri Bottas, obviously did my video on him last Sunday, and I think he's edging towards an exit from Mercedes. The question is when, right? It's not if at this point. I think Bottas is done at Mercedes. The end of the year is going to see the end of Valtteri Bottas at Mercedes, but it's when is that change going to happen? Is it going to be George Russell in the summer break? Is it going to be George Russell for the last 3 or 4 races of the season? Maybe when the Constructors and the Drivers' Championships have all been sewn up? Or is it going to be Russell from the end of this season? Let Bottas obviously move into 2022 with a new team, with a new style, and maybe bring George Russell in then. Will Hamilton stick around if George Russell comes in? There's so many questions around Valtteri Bottas, and I'd love to know, after one more race, we've seen another race where Bottas has lost out. He was absolutely bloody livid with Toto Wolff and the Mercedes team. I don't think I've ever heard Valtteri Bottas that angry before. He was incredibly angry with the team, and you can't really blame him. Perez managed to make a one-stop strategy work, but we know Perez is an absolute bloody wizard on his tyres. Hamilton and Bottas just did not make it work, and those tyres just did not last on the Mercedes car. And it's a bit strange to me that they decided to go for that tactic, and it's even more strange that with Bottas being an incredible amount in front of Norris, who was behind him, and him having to make up as many points as possible that they didn't put him out on the medium tyres for one more lap at the end of the race to set a fastest lap. And in fact, it was Perez that nearly set the fastest lap on 24-old hard tyres, where he was at the end of the lap, at the end of the Grand Prix, on the 53rd lap, on the last lap of the race, Perez set the second fastest lap time of anyone out there. And I was stunned. He was incredibly good. Obviously, Max Verstappen also picking up the actual fastest lap. But those front four, there was so much to talk about with them. You know, it could have been Verstappen's day. It could have been Hamilton's day. Could have even been Perez's day at one point. At one point, I thought Perez was just going to jump them all with how good he managed to get hold of those tyres and keep them going throughout the entire race. But I'd love to know what you think. Was that top four deserved? Who do you think next time out in Austria is going to maintain that pace, maintain that consistency? Do you think it's going to be Hamilton fighting back into P1, or do you think Verstappen can keep himself ahead? Do you think Perez can make himself almost like the Ham-Bot Ver that we used to have beforehand? Are we looking now at a Ham-Ver-Perez battle for those top three? And is Bottas now definitely the fourth best driver out there? Let's talk about the other teams very, very quickly, because McLaren had a good day. I wouldn't say it was amazing. You've got to remember they were still a minute or so behind those front four drivers, but those front four absolutely stole the show. Daniel Ricciardo with a 6th place finish. Thank you, Daniel Ricciardo. I predicted that he was going to come 6th, so I will have no slander in the comments whatsoever. I said a 6th place finish for Daniel Ricciardo is what I'm looking for from him in this race. And my goodness, he delivered. He gained so many places on that undercut, by the way. And we saw so many moves from Daniel Ricciardo. We finally saw him diving into corners late, getting in front of people, dominating a corner, coming around in that position. And finally, we saw that come into fruition for him in this McLaren. He said that this circuit in particular, although one that doesn't really sort of adapt to his style massively, I wouldn't say, but because there was that open space, he had that little bit more fallback, I guess. If he would have gone wrong, then he wouldn't have smashed into a wall like he would have in Monaco or Baku. So he was able to just put himself in that position in a new car where he was fighting for positions, diving up the inside of corners, and it was really, really lovely to see. On the flip side of that, we had Norris, who went on a completely different strategy and just made it work. Yes, he was quicker than Ricciardo at the end. We saw those team orders, but Lando Norris was exceptionally quick on the completely different strategy. Almost in a Perez situation, he just managed to jump everyone else in the same way that Perez jumped Bottas. Lando Norris just jumped everyone else in the midfield and managed to put himself in that top 5 spot. And I think he's finished top 5, 8 of the last 10 races. That is insane from Norris. If you're thinking he's in the 3rd fastest car, the best you can get on a day where everybody else in front of you finishes is 5th place. And he's continually in that top 5. Lando Norris is coming to life this season, and I'm absolutely all for it. On the other hand, we had the Ferraris, and my goodness, it was a bad day for Ferrari, wasn't it? An awful, awful day for Ferrari. And if we look at the constructors, they have lost out on quite a few points to their McLaren rival for that 3rd place. 18 points behind now. That's quite a chunk, 18 points, especially when you're in that sort of 3rd, 4th tier team on the grid, and you're only going to be picking up, 10 points for a 5th place, 8 points for a 6th place here and there. 18 points is a lot of points to be behind, when Ferrari were looking very, very good beforehand. Both Ferraris finishing outside the points, and Leclerc, his 2nd worst finish in Formula 1. Wow, they just could not make those tyres work, could they? Leclerc actually gained a lot of places in the first pit stop, but after 2 laps, his tyres looked dead, and he was gone into the water, and Leclerc was absolutely awful. Now talking about Gasly in the AlphaTauri, and I just don't even know what to think about Gasly at this point. He is either absolutely on fire, or Tsunoda is so incredibly bad. Like, if you look at those points, I know just flick between. If you look at AlphaTauri with 45 points, 37 of those coming from Gasly. 37. Imagine if Tsunoda had a similar sort of return to Gasly and was in and amongst that sort of Ricciardo position. you'd be looking at AlphaTauri fighting up with the Ferraris and up with the McLarens rather than looking at the Aston Martins and the Alpines. And I don't know whether it is just Gasly being electric or Tsunoda being bad or a bit of a mixture of both. It's so weird to see such a gap between those two. But my goodness, Gasly is carrying this AlphaTauri team. And if he doesn't get a drive at Red Bull next season, he needs to be looking at those top tier teams. He needs to be looking at being the number one in a bigger team. Because let's face it, AlphaTauri are never going to get in front of Red Bull. It's just not going to happen. But if he can get a move to a Mercedes, let's say Hamilton leaves, can he get a move to McLaren? Let's say Daniel Ricciardo doesn't really fancy it anymore. Can he get a move to maybe an Alpine? I know Ocon has just done a 3-year contract. Can he get in the second car? Maybe Alpine can fight a little bit further up the grid later on this season. It's tricky for Gasly. He's in a bit of a difficult situation, but he's absolutely electric. And on the other hand, Tsunoda is having a rubbish time again. Rubbish in qualifying, coming 13th in the end there. I know he started from the pit lane, so 13th, maybe not a terrible finish, but when your teammate is getting constant points and finishing 7th place, wow, you just have to be like, Gasly, you are bloody amazing, mate. Then we have the Aston Martins, both of them finishing in the points after what was looking like quite a disappointing qualifying. Obviously, Stroll ditching it, not being able to get through into Q3 because he had his time deleted. And actually a really good finish from Vettel and Stroll, 9th and 10th for them respectively. Another 3 points on the board, just edging themselves away from Alpine. And Alpine, the only really good news was that Alonso was able to get involved with those Aston Martins and almost with Gasly towards the end of the race, but it was looking tough for Alonso at one point. He looked like a sitting duck after those first pit stops. He just could not get those hard tyres to work, and I'm so glad that they brought him in for another set of tyres and changed the tactic around a little bit, because an 8th place finish for Alonso is very, very good, although Ocon down in 14th. It's looking a bit weird, actually. So Alonso now on 17 points, Ocon only on 12, and Alonso just sort of eking out a little bit of a lead over Ocon after sort of talking earlier on in the season, saying that he was struggling in the car and Ocon was doing incredibly well in comparison to him. Now it looks like the turntables have turned, in that Alonso has sort of taken that sort of step forward and is now looking like the first driver in that team, the number one driver in that team, even though Ocon has just done that 3-year deal and Alonso's actually looking the better driver. It's going to be a very awkward scenario for them at the end of the season, if, of course, it does come to fruition where Alonso is a lot further ahead than Ocon than he is now. The Alfa Romeos, nothing to report. I literally have no idea what happened to the Alfa Romeos all weekend because they were just nowhere, really. Nothing to report. They didn't really shock me in the race. They didn't show any ridiculous pace at any point. There wasn't really any incidents with them. They did okay. They did all right. But I would like to talk about George Russell in the bloody Williams. My God, look at this. Where is George Russell's name? P12. On merit, everybody finished the race and Russell got that Williams car, the worst car on the grid. I actually think that this Williams car might be slower than the Haas in some of these circuits, and I think this is one of those circuits where the Haas could have had the advantage over the Williams, and Russell gets it into 12th place. Yes, you could argue that, Leclerc was completely out of position, and you could argue Tsunoda really didn't get it together, Ocon really didn't get it together, but Russell finishing P12, this man needs to be in a Mercedes ASAP, and another nail in the coffin, I think, for Bottas, because Russell is showing the pace now. He's showing the pace in the worst car on the grid and being incredibly, incredibly consistent. Let's say any other race, two people in front of him crash into one another. Let's say Hamilton and Verstappen have an issue. This man's now getting a point in 10th place in a Williams car, the worst car on the grid by a mile. Wow, he is so incredibly good. I cannot wait to see him in a World Championship winning car. I cannot wait to see him fighting up with Verstappen, Leclerc, Norris, because he deserves to be up there. He deserves to be fighting with those new drivers coming through and showing that he can be in and amongst those big boys. Yes, it is a big step up to get into one of those teams, and yes, that final sort of 5% that you have to show that you can win a race, He just needs that opportunity. I know he had one race in a Mercedes, but he needs a longer opportunity. He needs a proper opportunity to show his pace, because I'm incredibly impressed with George Russell. And finally, the Haas guys. A bit of a non-weekend for the Haas guys as well. Obviously, Mick getting into Q2 for the first time. Really, really well done, although it was because of a red flag. So a bit of a rain cloud hanging over that Q2 performance with Mick, especially because it was him that put himself in the wall. So yeah, very, very tricky weekend for Haas again, but I don't think we were expecting anything else really. But the main talking point is Max Verstappen. He was incredibly quick, got the strategy right. Mercedes got the strategy wrong. Bottas is absolutely livid with the team. Hamilton now dropping even further behind. It's becoming one of those seasons, isn't it? I really don't want to jinx it, but this could be one of those seasons we look back on in 5 or 6 years' time and be like, my goodness, that was an incredible season. A bit like how at the moment I'm looking back at the Hamilton-Rosberg season. I've watched a few documentaries about that season recently, and I'm just like, wow, that was such a good season. Can we have another one of those, please? And we're sort of getting towards having another one of those, but this time it's in 2 different teams. We've got Perez, we've got Bottas, we've got the ability for those guys to get involved, to try and hold up the drivers, as what I thought Bottas was going to do with Verstappen, to maybe help Hamilton out a little bit, but that really didn't happen, did it? So all in all, an absolutely incredible France Grand Prix. Thank you so much for watching. Leave your comments down below. What did you think of the race this weekend? What did you think of Verstappen, Hamilton? Who do you think might come out on top? Do you think Bottas is completely done? When do you think that Russell is going to get that move to Mercedes? Do you think that Russell's going to get that move to Mercedes? And do you think Ferrari, do you think it was just a bad weekend, or is this really their pace when we're not on a street circuit? I'd love to know those answers all in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.